Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, hello. I'm Al Jacobson, Executive Director of the Allentown Symphony Association, and it is a pleasure to welcome you here to our final Meet the Artist event for the season. Thank you for joining us for these insights into the music that's going to be performed this weekend. I always like to check, usually it's the same answer. Does anyone not have tickets for this weekend? Yeah, all of you have tickets. Okay, great. So you're either purchased tickets, you're a subscriber. Thank you so much for being a part of our family, subscribing to the symphony. We have a lot of exciting things come up. You'll hear it from me this weekend. Our John Williams concert, our tribute to John Williams, is officially sold out in early May. And so we're excited to be presenting that, but we have jazz concerts, a lot of things happening here at Miller Symphony Hall in the coming months, and of course next season has been announced. So if you have not renewed your subscription to next season, please do that as soon as possible, or you may have already received a phone call about it. But we have an exciting season planned featuring great music of the masters. We're doing Bizet's Carmen, we're doing Beethoven's Ninth, Brahms' Second Piano Concerto, but also a lot of other things, and Diane's going to speak about that as well. So a lot of great things to look forward to. To maximize the time, I'm done here. It's now my pleasure to introduce our music director and conductor, finishing her 28th season this year, Diane Wittry.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to see everybody here. Beautiful weather, beautiful music. So I've got our wonderful guests with us. I'm going to just quickly say their names so we can welcome them, and I'll introduce them more formally a little bit further into the program. But we have our violin soloist. This is Leonard Fu. Let's give him a round of applause. And then we have Edward Leonard. We call them the Leonards. Two Leonards.
We come in a set.
And Edward Leonard is our conducting fellow from the Pittsburgh area. So this concert originally started around Tchaikovsky Symphony No. 4, which is a wonderful work, one of my favorites. And Tchaikovsky wrote this work in 1877. And he finished it, pretty much the sketches were done in May and June. And this was a time period when he was connected to Nadia von Meck, which was his patron, that became a patron during this time period, and continued to send him 500 rubles every single month for 13 years. The amazing thing is they never met in person. That was part of the stipulation. But she was an avid fan of his music, and they corresponded with letters. And thank goodness, because we have copies of these letters. And so from these letters, we know things that Tchaikovsky thought about his works that he shared with her that he didn't tell anybody else. And so some of those things I'll talk with you about today. This symphony, and he called it our symphony when he he dedicated it to her in his mind. And as he was writing it, he was actually bouncing ideas off of her and seeking encouragement. So with this symphony, it's in the standard 4 movements, but the whole symphony is based upon fate. And he really was inspired by Beethoven's 5th Symphony. So we're all familiar with the ba-ba-ba-bum, right? That famous fate motive. And so he created his own fate motive. And this comes at the very opening of the symphony. So to start off, let's listen to this fate motive. there's the fate motive. So you hear the bum, ba-da-dum, bum, bum. The important motive to hear in there is the da-da, da-dum, da-da, da-dum, because he uses that rhythm then for the next section and throughout the entire first movement. And it's the resignation that there's nothing you can do about this fate, that it's going to take over. And he actually says, and I quote this, that our only choice is to surrender to it and to languish fruitlessly. So he was a little depressed, right? So here's after the fate motive, here's how the symphony begins. So that's the rising motive, and this spins out. So I wanted you to hear that theme, but now I want to take you through, in the first movement, the fate motive occurs 5 times, interrupting the piece, okay? So this way, when you hear in the concert, you're gonna know, you can count them, and you can be expecting this interruption. So I want to hear, so they're all similar, but they're all different. Here they are. So that was the second statement. Now the third statement, and it's a little bit longer, a little bit more drawn out. So I looped those into one statement, but you heard actually 3 statements, right? But it's all within this one section. This is the very big dramatic section of the piece. And then we have a 4th statement that comes, what I call at the ending, but it's not the last one. And then here's the last statement, and it's a little bit more fragmented. And there you have it, all the fate motives at one time. But I will say there's actually, he puts it in the last moment too. So you do get a moment of more fate. So then the second movement, one of the most famous lyrical themes ever. And it was interesting as we're rehearsing it because so often we want to play this as just a beautiful melody. But I had to remind the orchestra that it's sad. It's a sad melody. And with this, he writes, you feel nostalgic for the past, and yet no compulsion to start life over again. Life has wearied you. And so that's the atmosphere that we're trying to create with this second movement. And that's not that excerpt. I forgot that I gave you the second theme of the first movement, but I'm gonna actually skip over that one, but I will tell you the second theme of the first movement is a release from fate, and it's a time of sort of dreams and peacefulness, and it's wonderful solos in the woodwind section. But since I set you up for that second movement, let's do the second movement. Well, that's not going to work. We have a new CD player. That's my excuse, and I'm going with it. Here we go. It is cute, but it's not playing my track. Nope. Let's try that. Yeah, isn't that a beautiful melody? Then the third movement was very, very unusual and something that no one before him had really done in a symphony. The third movement is in sort of 3 sections with then a combination of all the instruments. But there's an entire section of pizzicato where the musicians pluck the strings, okay? And then this is followed by a woodwind section and a brass section. So most recently we use this movement as an example in our concert for children of the different instruments of the orchestra. It's a great example of that. But here's the pizzicato section. Yeah, when Leonard talks, I'm going to have him talk a little bit about pizzicato, because pizzicato is really important in the ELGAR too. And it's very difficult to play to get that beautiful, what we call fleshy sound, as opposed to a brighter nail sound. So later on I'll have him demonstrate some of the different techniques of pizzicato and why that's important in this concert. After the pizzicato section, the woodwinds come in, and it's a difficult part for the woodwinds, and at the rehearsal they were playing it very, what I call perfectly, so very rhythmically correct, and everything was very there, but it didn't have the spark, and I had to explain to them that for Tchaikovsky, this third movement was like a peasant dance, and literally people were drinking, and there's alcohol involved. So as soon as I said that, they got it. And so even this recording that you're going to hear, to me, is not quite as much fun as what you're going to hear at our concert, where they're really going to just let loose and have some fun with that section. And then it's followed by a little march section. So we have the kind of drunken party, and then we have the military band that's marching by. So that's slower than I'm going to go, and ours is going to be a lot more fun. I think sometimes people take this slow because it's very hard for the piccolo, and coming up there's some really hard parts for the clarinet and the piccolo, and so you notice they kind of slowed down right before they got to those solos. I'm merciless. And our players are doing a fabulous job, so that's going to be a really fun, fast section, and then here's the march. Yeah, so those are what we call licks that are going to be on our audition when we audition for a new third and piccolo player. Very, very difficult. Good job on that recording, and our player's going to do it fantastic too. And so then we have a little bit of the fourth movement, just three quick examples. One is the beginning, which you may recognize, which to me is like fireworks. It's like we finish this nice pizzicato, and then attacca, which means I'm going to go without pause. Anyone that's relaxed during the pizzicato, we're going to wake you up. that fun? Woke you up, didn't I? And the sound you're hearing there, that's not half of what's going to be coming off the stage with the orchestra. I mean, that's why you come to concerts live, is to get the power of that energy coming off the stage for stuff like that. And then remember I told you that fate motive? It sneaks back in the final movement, and here it is. And that was the ending. I'll just give that to you right now, the very ending. Here we go. I think that's a great way to end the season, don't you think? Yeah. And for that ending, where you want to keep your eyes and your ears, I would suggest is on the cymbal player. The cymbal part here is one of the most difficult in the repertoire. And I don't know if you're aware, but cymbals weigh about 20 pounds. Okay, they're heavy. And the person has to literally do all of those very quickly and balance them so they get a beautiful sound on every single cymbal crash. So we have a wonderful player playing the cymbals, but that's an exciting thing to listen for at the end of this symphony. So partnered with this, we have two other wonderful works. We have the ELGAR Violin Concerto, and we open with a piece by Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. I've been sort of doing a piece by Samuel Coleridge-Taylor every year because I really enjoy his music. This piece was written in 1899, I think, 1899. And this piece was written as an overture to his cantata, which was the Song of Hiawatha, which is actually 3 separate pieces he wrote. But the Hiawatha's Wedding Feast was the piece that he wrote that put him on the map internationally. And he was only 22 years old when he wrote that piece. And we have to remember that he died very young. He died at the age of 37. And it's just to me so sad that we didn't have more music from this wonderful composer. So he was of mixed race. His father was from Africa. His mother was British. And he was raised in London. He was trained at the Royal College of Music. And he was able to actually meet ELGAR, and ELGAR really mentored him in many ways. And I think there's some similarities in the way they approach the musical melodic line. So I'm just going to play one example of the opening, and then the rest you have to come to the concert to hear this wonderful work. Let's see if I've got this right. That's not the right one. go. So you're going to hear, I take it a little bit faster than that tempo, but you're going to hear as the piece develops, you're going to hear sections I call like the Indian drums. This is all based upon poetry by Longfellow. So it's very American, even though he's British. And Samuel Coleridge-Taylor actually came to the United States. He performed for President Roosevelt, and there was actually a Samuel Coleridge-Taylor Society that was supporting his music in Washington, D.C. And his goal was really to pay tribute to the African-American man and to give them dignity through his expression of music. And I think that's a very, very noble goal. So now I'd like to introduce Leonard Fu, who's been sitting here so patiently. And Leonard is a student at Juilliard. He's doing an artist diploma. And he is the winner of our SCHOTT International Violin Competition. He played the ELGAR for that competition, and he has the most beautiful sound and is such a wonderful musician. So I'm going to turn over to him to talk about the piece and play some examples from it.
I'll just speak like this. So, thank you.
And I'll put this higher so that when you demonstrate.
Thank you. Well, as you can tell, my motor skills are great. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be here in Allentown, surrounded by all these wonderful people that have invited me back to perform with the amazing Allentown Symphony Orchestra. This is actually, to be honest with you, going to be my very first time performing the ELGAR Violin Concerto with a live orchestra, so this is also a very special moment for me.
And also our first time performing the ELGAR.
So we're each other's firsts, which is amazing. We have already had one rehearsal last night, which I thought went extremely well. I had a wonderful time, and you know, we as performers and as students of music, we spend so much time in our practice room, and you know, when we first approach a piece, at least my process is sort of, I listen to maybe recordings that are out there, I read up on the composer, I read up on the circumstance in which this piece emerged, and then I start looking at the score and I see how is it written, what is sort of my role in this piece as a soloist. And you know, we often talk about sort of the great violin concerti, and we talk about them as they were just one big consortium of concerti. And I like to think that every composer had a different idea of what the solo instrument is actually supposed to be doing. Just as an example, if we look into sort of more older times in the Baroque era, concerti were often more sort of in a playoff between one group, which were the soloists, and another group, which were the ripieno, which were the tutti members, and you had sort of a face-off, and often they would play against each other and alternate. And then we move on to the classical times, and for example, Mozart and his 5 famous violin concerti, the violin often takes on a very operatic sort of aria-like role, and the violin is sort of the heroine of the story, which is very different from, say, Beethoven's Violin Concerto, which in my humble opinion, I think the violin is not really the hero of the story at all. It's much more looking like at a big pastoral painting and seeing the river that stretches from the left corner of the picture to the bottom right corner, and sort of the red band that ties everything together, but it's not really this heroic voice. And with ELGAR, we had already talked, Diane and I had talked about how ELGAR wrote this piece for a mysterious beloved, and he put a question mark in the score for whom exactly this was, so we don't really know which lucky lady he was thinking of when he wrote this gigantic love declaration, essentially. But I think this dedication is very audible in the way he composed this piece, and part of why I personally love the language of ELGAR is that he really managed to turn the violin into a voice. And the way it's written, it's both extremely sung, but also very spoken at the same time. You can often hear in the way that he writes his themes you can almost put imaginary words on top of it, especially this piece is composed very motivically, even though it is so melodious and you basically hear one beautiful melody after another. They're all constructed from these little cells that transform even before the violin has even entered. We've already lived through an entire lifetime of stories with these motives, and by the time the violin comes in, we actually have this very strange feeling of the violin coming in at the end of a chapter. It feels like the violin entry is not this big heroic entry, but much more already setting the tone for a very sentimental, melancholic sort of atmosphere that he sets us in. And ELGAR himself actually said about this violin concerto, he said, "Oh yes, I love it. It's emotional. It's awfully emotional, maybe too emotional." And you can also tell that he wasn't really willing to let go of the compositional process, because the piece, takes, if we're optimistic, 50, if we're realistic, 55 minutes of performance time. But I promise you that it's really going to be a wonderful 55 minutes of music, because by the time we get to what I like to call the heart of the core of this piece, we're deep into the last movement, the third movement of the concerto, and that's where ELGAR curiously places the only cadenza of this violin concerto. And usually when you think of cadenza, when we think of the concerti of Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms, Tchaikovsky, that's sort of when the orchestra stops playing and the violin figuratively steps forward and says, "Look what I can do." And this is very much not the case with this piece. Just like all the other plenty virtuosic passages in this piece, nothing seems like it's ever written to show off our technical abilities. And same applies to this cadenza, where we really feel like we're boiling down some kind of a message, some kind of essence that ELGAR has been trying to convey for the past 40 minutes. And then we get to this cadenza, and it really feels like we get this insight into the deepest crevices of his brain and his heart. And really, it's incredibly vulnerable music, but it's also incredibly passionate music, and it's loving, and it's sad. And I think part of why this concerto is so personal and special to me is because it really allows you as a performer to reveal very tender and not often revealed qualities of the human condition. And to share that with an audience is an incredibly intimate and vulnerable experience, and I look very forward to doing that. In this entire cadenza of the last movement, he brings back all the themes of previous movements, of the previous two movements, and I just want to play maybe one of my favorite melodies of this concerto, which is the second theme of the first movement, simply because it is such a great example of this both melodious but also spoken quality of his writing. Thank you. And obviously, there's a wonderful orchestral part that accompanies this, and not only accompanies this, but entangles, intertwines. And some of the lines that I was just playing are actually more accompanimental to sort of the orchestra taking over this spoken love declaration, you know? It's sort of like I'm speaking a thought into existence, and then the orchestra takes it over and responds to it, and I'm dancing around it, I'm singing around it. And something that was really special to me during the study of this concerto is we're lucky enough with Elgar that he lived long enough to live into a time where we do have recordings and we have live performances of Elgar himself conducting and playing his music. And especially in regards to this piece, he originally dedicated this concerto to the Viennese cafe violinist Fritz Kreisler, a wonderful composer himself. And Kreisler also took on the challenge of playing this piece, but when Elgar, after the premiere, asked him if he would be willing to record this piece, Kreisler never responded to that letter, which sort of left Edward Elgar with unfinished business. And 20 years after the composition of this piece, there was a 16-year-old young violinist named Yehudi Menuhin. And essentially, he got into contact with Edward Elgar and said he was willing to record the piece. And Elgar was very, at first, skeptical, because he said, well, how can a 16-year-old express the melancholy and the sentiment of this music? But then 16-year-old Menuhin played for him just the first page of the piece, and Elgar said, oh, you know what, it's fine. He has everything that I'm looking for in this concerto. And lucky for us, we now have a surviving recording of 16-year-old Yehudi Menuhin performing this concerto with Elgar himself conducting it. And in a letter to Menuhin, Elgar wrote, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the quote on me, but he said, you know, the new zest in life that you have brought to me simply by the way you have expressed and emoted this concerto has given me such new energy in life, and I'm so excited and glad that you were willing to play this concerto. And so we know that he was incredibly fond of the interpretation of Yehudi Menuhin of this piece. And subsequently, I took a great deal of time studying this recording and really understanding not only sort of the surface level, sort of the way it manifests in sound, but really understanding what moved Menuhin in certain passages to play things a certain way, understanding the rubato, understanding the push and pull, the tucking at the heartstrings, the fleeting qualities, and basically creating this entire language, this new language of how this instrument can sound. And in that quest, I really feel like I have made some progress into delving into the old-timey sound that we don't hear very often in live performances anymore. And I really try to find a different type of sound to really play this concerto. And I'm very excited to share this journey with all of you and let you be the judge of how I'm doing with that. Thank you.
And I want Leonard to talk a little bit about the cadenza and to actually demonstrate in the cadenza, because you touched upon it, but what people may not be aware of is in this cadenza, the orchestra's playing the whole time, but the strings are what we call divisi, so inside and outside people that sit on the outside are doing one thing, people that sit on the inside are playing a different part. And the inside people have to do this very odd pizzicato strumming. And he actually, he says to do it with 3 to 4 fingers, but tell them what you told the orchestra last night.
So what I told the orchestra last night was that if we all wanted to do the multiple finger strumming, we all either must have had extensive training in guitar playing or have really learned playing the violin on the streets of Budapest with a gypsy band. Because truth be told, that's sort of the only groups of people that I can imagine doing this effortlessly. So I think, I can't demonstrate this three-finger technique, but you can imagine it if you think of flamenco guitar playing and sort of like this rapid succession of fingers hitting the string. That's a type of coordination that I don't possess. So,
and our orchestra members were challenged by this because it also has to be very soft.
Right. So he marks it, I think, triple
Yep.
P and pianissimo. And so there's this conundrum of if we just sort of go back and forth with our finger, what is it? We have on one side, when I strum down, we have the fleshy part of the finger touching the string. If I go back up, we have the nail touching the string, which causes a rather unpleasant spike in volume. So we have if we do that. So I've been sort of trying to come up with solutions, and I just thought if I angle my finger incredibly inwards, then on my way back, I'm still using the fleshy part of the finger. And that's how we can get that texture.
Yeah. So with the orchestra, they have to all get that sound. So some of them are doing the plucking, and it's for the conductor, it's a very challenging section because almost every beat has a fermata. And then what I learned during the read-through, where the horns actually came in a bar early, and so I went back and looked at their part, and it was one of those bars where I have 4 fermatas and they only had 1 fermata. So they didn't know I was going 4 times and stopping, and so they then, of course, on the second time my hand moved, thought, oh, next bar, right? And so it's everybody understanding with the fermatas, and then sometimes Leonard has a lot of music where we're on fermata, and sometimes it goes very quickly from fermatas.
I mean, there's actually a passage that I didn't notice until yesterday in rehearsal, where I suddenly have, I think, like 13 quarters in one bar, and in everyone else's part is just a fermata. So it's like I have to fit what usually would be 4 beats in a bar, but I have to play 13, and 7 of them have fermatas on them, and so it's really quite tricky to know exactly for the orchestra members to know when to move, and that poses also this challenge of, well, why did ELGAR write these fermatas? Because he wants this to be a very personal sort of statement. It shouldn't feel like I have to squeeze sort of what I try to say into a time frame, and at the same time he needed to accompany this cadenza with the orchestra part, which is something he didn't have to do if he didn't thought that that was really necessary and important. So the big challenge is to make it sound incredibly personal, improvised, on the moment, sort of stream of thought sharing, but it needs to seem that way to all of you. We hopefully have a very coordinated strategy of how to move through it.
That's exactly right. And like I said, it's so challenging, and then the players' parts are somewhat confusing. And I think of a bar where you would normally think of 4 fermatas, but there are 5 in that bar. And so everybody gets confused that the one with 3 has another extra one before the one with 4. And I have to make sure I stay low, because if I do the end of 3 high, some of the people just counting might think that my 4, which is much more dramatic, sounds like a 1, but it's a 4. And so you might notice subtly if you're watching me that when I come down, it's very large and very clear, 1. So hopefully, and then way over here, so that hopefully everybody knows where we are. But we're having a good time with it, and you play it just spectacularly. So, yes. So I want to introduce our conducting fellow now, and this is Edward Leonard, and Edward Leonard is both the founder and the music director of the Chamber Orchestra of Pittsburgh. And he's been very helpful with listening. In the hall, when he listens, I put him right over here where Jim Yorgi is, or where Linda Gardner is. And he sits there so that as I'm conducting, I can turn around on this side and I can look, and he is listening all the time, so he can give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Okay? So sometimes, well, I always say, the conductors that go,
Yeah,
Those are the ones I don't bring back.
That's not helpful.
Right, exactly. And so usually it's a spot where maybe the woodwinds are playing, and so he'll know you'll know what I'm listening for. So talk a little about what you're doing here.
From my own conducting, it's incredibly helpful because you hear, and in particular in this hall, some halls are different than others. Every hall is different, right? But if you're standing on the podium, what you're hearing there can be drastically different than what you hear here, up there, up there. So I was getting my steps in, running up and down the stairs, because this hall in particular, it's quite different. And you've probably noticed this if you've been to concerts at different levels, is that just the balance of the orchestra, they could play completely the same. It's just the acoustics change. So I've been taking notes, mostly on balance, because that's what I could be the most helpful at as Diane and the orchestra interpret the piece and Leonard's accompany. And what's really important is because you have the orchestra is like 85 people in the ELGAR versus together with one violin. And that is, whenever you have like a string concerto, that's a huge challenge, is balance, is he being featured really as a soloist. And so far, the balance has been tremendous. But there are certain places where Diane and I have spoken, maybe ahead of time or at the previous rehearsal, where there was something that we kind of came to the conclusion that the balance was a little off. So in the second rehearsal, she'll turn around at those spots, and I, say that was good, or or whatever. So that's mostly what I'm doing during the rehearsals.
Yeah, and we actually did a little experiment. Because we'd been hearing that the trumpets were sometimes a little bit loud in the balcony. And so we actually we had them play in one place for the first rehearsal, and then the second rehearsal we moved them to a different spot on the stage to see if that changed anything. And
they moved about 3 feet, I think.
And down.
And down. And it was incredible, the difference, because you can also speak to, especially a projecting instrument like the trumpet or trombone, something that's like really pointed at you, it's directional. So if you just say, hey, Omri, who's the principal trumpet, we've noticed that the sound really projects. Can you just bring your bell with the front of the trumpet just down 2 inches? It makes a huge difference. He doesn't really have to even change how he's playing. It just blends different. The sound's kind of directed into the poor bassoon's head instead of, into the mezzanine. So what we noticed is this had been brought up, I think, in a previous cycle. So I went up, listened there, and I listened there and there, and actually the balance was pretty good. I think the trumpets were already kind of aware of the issue and were adjusting. And then we tried the experiment where they were brought forward and down. And while the blend was a little better, their volume was a little bit less, they were also a little bit mushed into what we call a sound shield, so it's protecting the back of, let's say, a bassoonist's head or a viola or something like that, where you have these directional instruments and it kind of disperses the sound so it's not directly in their ear. But what we noticed is, and Diane and I agreed, is when that happened, the sound was more blended, but it kind of like muted the kind of quality of the instrument, so we actually moved them back.
yeah, and it was funny because I talked to Omri about it, and he he felt like he was in a little box because he had plastic shields in front of him and plastic shields for the trombone sound for his ears behind him, and he just said he couldn't even function. He said, I would quit if I had to play in that little box. I said, no worries, we're moving you back up. Keep the bell down.
Yeah, but that's been my role, and also listening, because this is the first time they've played the Hiawatha Overture and the first time they've done the ELGAR, and they're all pretty familiar with the Tchaikovsky. So it's really interesting when you hear a reading, in particular the ELGAR, which I give huge credit to Diane and the orchestra, especially in the cadenza. It's like if you've ever seen opera or worked with an opera conductor or a rehearsal, the vocal lines are constantly changing, sometimes within a beat. So it's really up to the conductor to coordinate the singer or soloist and the orchestra. It's really hard. So the hardest conducting, that cadenza, very hard for the conductor, very hard for the orchestra and the soloist, and it sounds terrific. But just the level of, in particular, balance and just the quality between the reading of the ELGAR, which is this huge piece, and also the Coleridge-Taylor piece that they're going to do, to the second rehearsal, it's like they're reading and they're frantically trying to figure out how it works and get a roadmap. You know what I mean? Just like if you're figuring something out for the first time, and then the second time through, it's really like melding together the quality of the music's there. They're listening to other people. They're listening to Leonard. So it's really just fascinating. Last night I didn't really have many notes just because the musicians are so high in quality that they're able to just do that on their own, which is a relief for the conductor in particular.
No, they did a great job, and it was a lot of fun. Well, super. Well, we have a few minutes for some questions, and I know that you guys always have some really great questions for us. It could be for Leonard about his instrument or for anything. Yes? Yes, so if you look back, there are plastic plexiglass shields behind the bassoons, and often around the percussion between the horns. You can see one right there around the bass drum. So we do have portable shields, and Kevin, whenever a player comes backstage and says, you know, I need a shield, we try to make sure we get something, because we want to protect their ears as much as possible. Yeah. But the trumpets being up a level, then they've got a whole row before the bassoons. So it gives a little bit of time for the sound to not be just right in someone's ear. I mean, you imagine that if I were here, the bassoon would be here, and if I'm playing a trumpet, it's very close. Yeah. Other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Leonard, can you tell us about your violin? It's quite a pedigree.
Oh, yes. So I am in an incredibly privileged situation that I have received a loan from a German instrument foundation. And so I'm playing on one of the old Italians. It's a Lorenzo Storioni made in Cremona in 1781. And I have been playing on this beautiful violin for close to 2 years now. And I can confidently say that I've never had a feeling that as I did when I first touched this violin, and I played it, and instead of me trying to mold this violin to what I wanted, I felt like the violin was telling me how it wanted to be played. And I really have to say, this violin has taught me so much about playing the violin, and also I feel like I have really developed, in any other case, it would be strange to say you've developed such a relationship with an object, but I say the wood is alive, and so I've really formed a beautiful bond with this instrument, and I feel so lucky and joyful every time I get to play on it, especially in such a beautiful hall. So I look really forward to sharing what the violin can offer to the ears with you.
And it's interesting as you talk about your violin and the fact that, all of our musicians have special relationships with their instrument. And we forget that sometimes, how important it is to have a good instrument. And some of you know our associate principal cellist, Jameson Platty, and he has many different cellos and bows, and often he'll come in and say, well, I brought this one, I brought the Beast today. He has ones that he thinks are better for chamber music and ones better for different types of repertoire. Same with the woodwinds, whether it's a gold flute or whether it's a silver flute, or maybe it's a silver flute with a gold headpiece. A lot of discussions happen around the instruments that allow them to do their jobs. And it was interesting, I woke up this morning to NPR and a story about the conductor of National Symphony, who actually has a violin collection that he's accumulated, and he loans them to the orchestra members because he also understands that the sound of the instrument that the musicians are playing on makes a huge difference in the overall sound of the orchestra. So, other questions? Yes?
Why?
More than anything, it's more than everything else I own combined.
Yeah, the question was what the violin was worth. So go ahead with your.
I think you can buy a really nice house with it somewhere in South Carolina. Yeah.
On the ocean.
Yes.
Yes, question in the back.
You know, especially since the pandemic, a lot of performance plans have gotten a lot more short notice. So it's not necessarily clear what I will be doing throughout the fall and winter of 2023. But I am actually going to be heading to Montreal, Canada, 10 days from now for an international competition where, you know, if I make it to the finals, I will be playing with the Maison Symphonique de Montréal. It would be the Brahms Violin Concerto. And then later in May, I will be attending the Four Seasons Chamber Music Festival in North Carolina. And throughout the summer, I will be attending the Marlborough Chamber Music Festival in Marlborough, Vermont, where there will be weekend performances. And I will find a way to keep you updated on that.
Great. We want to find out all the wonderful things you're doing. And you know, we have to have great respect for Leonard and his memory because, you know, this is a 50 to 55 minute long concerto. And at the same time, he's got in his head the entire Brahms concerto, which he's playing in 10 days, which is also a huge piece in the repertoire.
That one's only 48 minutes.
We have time for, I think, one more question, if we've got a burning question out there. You guys are quiet today, yes.
If I had a choice, am I allowed to say?
Yeah.
Okay. I would go to the third floor up there because congratulations.
The front part of the third row, best sight, best sound.
Yeah, it blend like this isn't bad if you stay ahead of the little cap there. It's just the second floor is not bad at all either, but the sound really blends up there and you can see everybody. Leonard's going to really project up that way. So I would say the right in the center in the third floor would be the best.
It's a well-kept secret, but it's...
So when you get your subscription for next year, get it for right there.
Yeah, years ago when we were remodeling that third floor, I was outvoted, but I wanted to put box seats all the way across the front because I knew that those are just the best sight and the best sound in the house. So, all right, well, I want to thank all of you for coming today. And before I close, just put in a plug again for getting your subscriptions early for next year because we have a fabulous season in store for you. I mean, we're opening with the Brahms. I know Al said this, but the Brahms Piano Concerto with Bronfman, which is, I've been trying to get him for years, and we finally have got him coming. We've got a wonderful guitarist coming, Pizzicato, who was with the shot competition, one of our past winners. His career has taken off in Europe, and on that concert we're also doing a Mozart concerto, which is great. And we're going to repeat that concert at the Williams Center in Easton, so really getting the orchestra out of our immediate hall so we can serve more people. We have our holiday concert, which is going to be a tradition. We're doing Don Quixote, which is phenomenal. And for the Don Quixote, I will put that story up on the screen so you can follow every detail of the story as we play. We have the principal violist of the New York Philharmonic will be playing the viola part, Cindy Phelps, and she's wonderful. And then we have a wonderful cellist from Italy, actually, that we're bringing in to do the cello part. And then we have, we're doing Amy Beach, the Gaelic Symphony, which is not done very often. And this is what I think the first piece to be premiered by an American orchestra by a woman, by an American woman composer. And on that same program, we're bringing back Timmy Chewy, who was one of the shot winners a few years ago. And he'll do the Scottish Fantasy. And then we end with Beethoven 9. Which is really phenomenal, but I'm really excited about the first half of the concert because we'll be doing a work of mine, the Ode to Joy Fanfare, which will feature our El Sistema students performing with the symphony. I wrote the piece because you come to the Beethoven 9 and you have to wait 45 minutes till you get to the Ode to Joy, right? And a lot of people go, am I at the wrong concert? Where's the Ode to Joy? I thought I was going to Beethoven, you know? So we give you the Beethoven Ode to Joy right up front in my Ode to Joy fanfare. But I call it Beethoven and I in a blender, because it takes all the motives of all the different movements and it sort of swirls them all together on top of each other in a kind of unique way. And then we're commissioning Joe Jackson, a young rising African-American composer, to write a piece for us in the first half, and then some works also by Florence Price and Adolphus Hailstork. So really interesting program, and I know you're all going to enjoy it. And then we also have our Pops concerts, which are great too. Anyway, thank you very much, and tell your friends to come to the Allentown Symphony. Thank you and good afternoon.